The fact that Oliver Stone released not one, but two great movies in 1 year should be highly commended. But between Salvador and Platoon, it's pretty obvious that Platoon is the one most people watched. Platoon was the first Vietnam War film directed by a veteran of that war, and it launched the careers of many young actors that would later become prominent figures in American film. People such as Tom Berenger, Willem Dafoe, John C. McGinley, Keith David, Forrest Whitaker, Johnny Depp, and of course, Charlie Sheen. Oliver Stone spent years getting this one made. After several years of writing a script and a number of failed attempts to make the film, he rallied producer Arnold Kopelson to his side, and the two of them eventually got the film off the ground. Of course, the film never stopped being a struggle to make, especially considering that the country they were shooting in suddenly underwent a revolution during production. Stone had been disgusted by John Wayne's film The Green Berets and wanted his actors to convey what he and other soldiers had really experienced in the war. With the help of fellow Vietnam veteran Dale Dye, Stone organized a 2-week boot camp which vigorously prepared the cast and pushed them to their limits. The story of the film itself follows a young recruit named Chris Taylor, played by Charlie Sheen. Taylor eventually gets locked into a moral tug-of-war between the two most prominent sergeants of the platoon he's in. First off, we see the ruthless Staff Sergeant Barnes, played by Tom Berenger. Barnes effectively runs the platoon in all but name. The young lieutenant of the platoon is a spineless coward who is inept in his abilities, and most of the sergeants suck up to Barnes' dictatorship. The only one who openly dislikes this arrangement is Sergeant Elias, played by Willem Dafoe. Elias is more openly compassionate for the men under his command and tries to maintain morals during amoral times. As the film goes on, we see that the platoon is split into two factions, one siding with Elias, the other with Barnes. Stone simplifies the conflict by having Elias's faction use hallucinogenic drugs to restore their humanity after rough tours, and Barnes' faction swigs beer while emphasizing what they see as more macho attitudes. Taylor eventually falls in with Elias' group, but more often than not, finds himself admiring Barnes' leadership. The conflict really begins when a number of soldiers in the platoon are killed, and the nearby village contains Viet Cong weaponry. The soldiers are all angry and suspicious, looking for the slightest excuse to let out their anger. In just one of the very tense moments of the film, Taylor unleashes his anger on a disabled Vietnamese boy, only to barely stop himself from going over the edge. As he starts crying in shame at what he's done and what he almost did, one of the other young soldiers named Bunny, played by Kevin Dillon, mocks Taylor's supposed weakness and inflicts his own horrifying revenge. Meanwhile, Elias and Barnes clash over the actions undertaken in the village, and the platoon goes through a little war amongst themselves, even as the external war that they're supposed to be fighting gets further and further out of hand. Taylor stands at the center of it all, disillusioned by the effects of this war that cannot seem to be won, and the very notion that his own comrades are fighting amongst each other. I would love to go into each character of the platoon and talk about the actors that portray them, especially considering all the work that the actors put into their characters, but that would be a bit too much for this video. I should say, it can be a bit confusing at times, and it certainly took me multiple viewings to get them all identified throughout the film, but I'll say this. Aside from the characters I've already mentioned, one of my favorite characters in the film is Ra, played by the late Francesco Quinn. Ra is a brooding heroin addict that tries to follow Elias's actions by looking after the other soldiers. Quinn's rasping voice and characteristic quirks make Ra a really memorable role for me. But you could say that most of the characters in this film are interesting. Characters like Sergeant O'Neill, who uses bullying talk to compensate for being a cowardly hypocrite, or Junior, who's deeply influenced by the Black Power movement back in the States and is forced to deal with racists like Kevin Dillon's almost psychopathic portrayal of Bunny. I personally think Platoon is one of the best war films that I've ever seen, even to this day. It deals with the psychology and conflicts faced by the common soldiers during war, as well as showing us intense battle scenes that make sure to keep us just as disoriented as the soldiers themselves are. Oliver Stone and Dale Dye put a lot of effort into making the battles feel authentic, even for the people who had never experienced a real-life battle before. A lot of spoofs have been made about the heavy symbolism in this film, and yes, one of Stone's traits as a filmmaker is an extended use of symbolism and subtext, but I don't mind that in this film. It doesn't detract from the lean, vicious atmosphere this film creates, and the characters still come across as ordinary men trying to make it through this war intact. Considering the experience that Stone and Dye put them through, the performances really benefited. Berenger and Defoe both got Oscar nominations, and the gritty realism of being a soldier in Vietnam is carried across very well in the film. If you want to get a better idea of some of the effort that was put into this movie, I recommend the behind-the-scenes documentary. It'll give you a much bigger appreciation for Platoon and Oliver Stone's determination to make it. It's certainly one of the best films he's done, and thankfully it wasn't the last great film he was able to make.